What the city is talking about.
The news that impacts you.
Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast
with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Welcome to another edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and this week we'll take a look at these stories. Former U.S. President Donald Trump was indicted along with 18 others earlier in the week in the state of Georgia. A lot of people say this may be the most serious indictment of all. It's not federal, it's state. What does that mean? We'll talk to a reporter from the Washington Post to break it all down.
You know how ChatGPT can write an essay for you, a speech, pretty much anything? Well, how about doling out advice when it comes to our health? Yeah, according to new research, you might not want to count on artificial intelligence to get it right. But can it be a useful tool for health professionals and patients? The doctor we spoke to had some great insight and some warnings. Also, imagine going on a vacation without having to do any of the planning yourself. You just go to the airport, you get on a plane knowing everything has been taken care of, from the flight to dinner reservations. And it's affordable. Sound too good to be true? It actually isn't. It's called the Vacation Hunt. We talked to the co-founder.
But we start this week with an interview with Brian Mulroney, ostensibly to talk about Hugh Segal, someone probably most Canadians not in politics knew very little about. He passed away last week. He had been Brian Mulroney's chief of staff, so we thought we'd look back and try to get some comments from the former Prime Minister, but it turned into much, much more. So you may or may not have heard, and the reason I say it that way is because when this happened last week and I started to see the tributes being paid to him, I thought to myself, yes, I've heard the name Hugh Segal over the years, born in Montreal, but most people, even when you follow politics, I think as an outsider here, probably don't recognize the name, but it turns out Hugh Segal was a very prominent and highly respected, I said prominent already, in Canadian politics. And we thought to get a better understanding of that, because I think we kind of owe that to people here to understand, we should talk to someone he worked with, former chief of staff. So former Prime Minister, the Honorable Brian Mulroney, is on the line. Mr. Mulroney, thanks so much for being here.
Good day, Aaron. How are you?
Good, thanks. First of all, let me ask you, how are you?
Well, as you may have heard, I'm not ready for the Olympics, Aaron. I've had a pretty rough time with a combination of cancer in the last 6 months and heart failure. So I got the double whammy, and it's flattened me quite a bit, but I'm trying to make a comeback, and I'm doing pretty well. In fact, I had my first session today with my trainer, and I'm starting to get a little strength.
That's great news.
So it's been a rough period, but thank you for asking, and I'm doing much better. Thank you.
That's wonderful
Glad
news.
to hear that.
Absolutely. So, and when you said, I thought, wait a sec, the double whammy as you describe it, and the next thing, you're actually working with a trainer already, so I'm guessing you're feeling considerably better.
Yeah. Well, I just got out of the Heart Institute a couple of weeks ago after my surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the doctors are so good and the medicine is so highly developed these days that even with an old timer like me, they can make me look a little better. So that's what I'm trying to do.
You sound good. You sound like yourself. So I imagine.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Hugh Segal, someone you knew very, very well. And the fact that I mentioned, I don't know if you'd agree that most Canadians, you know, for someone who worked behind the scenes for so long, didn't necessarily know him.
Can you hear me, Aaron?
I can. Can you hear us?
Yes, fine. Okay, look, I loved Hugh Segal. He was a poor Jewish kid from Montreal who made his way in the world in a quite fantastic way. He was probably, my relative contemporaries, he was probably, I guess, the most admired political person in Canada for many years. He was progressive conservative. He was brought into the party by John Diefenbaker. He was a progressive conservative, but he was not a hyper partisan at all. You know, if you were liberal, NDP, whatever, as long as you loved Canada, Segal was on your side. Now, I thought, and I can tell you, I guess, that Hugh Segal had triangular interests. First, he loved his wife, Donna. Then he loved his daughter, Jackie. And he loved Canada. That was it. And he made an enormous contribution to our country. which is why when I was in difficulty, as I often was, I asked him to join me as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Canada, where he served with high distinction and did a wonderful job.
I understand he also had a great sense of humor, Mr. Mulroney.
God, you know what? When Hugh passed, the first thought that came to me was that my view of him every morning, we used to meet at 8:30 in my parliamentary office, and to begin the day. And even if the world was falling apart, or the party was being beaten up in some corner of Canada, Hugh always arrived with a big smile. I figured either he didn't read the papers, or he was just immune to reality. I loved him. He'd come in with a big smile on his face and have something happy to say about the country or about the party or even about me from time to time. No, he was wonderful. His sense of humor was absolutely delicious and really inspiring for a lot of people, because you see a lot of morose faces when you're trying to operate at a high level in Ottawa.
I bet.
You mentioned he was a progressive conservative, but not hyper-progressive conservative. And I wonder, the one thing in reading some of the tributes that have been paid to him in the past few days, people from across the political spectrum basically saying what you have just said now about what a great person he was, and how it didn't matter what your political stance was. He would work with anyone and everyone to get something done.
Absolutely. That's one of the, if you'll remember back, Aaron, 1990, 1991, 1992 were a period of great crisis in Canada, with free trade and the GST and Meech Lake and Charlottetown and all these things. They've all pretty well turned out to be very beneficial for Canada, as Hugh recently wrote. But in those days, everything was pretty well unknown and very challenging. And Hugh came in with his kind of infectious laughter and generous approach and thoughtful commentary on people. He brought them all together and made a lot of these things happen. Look, I can remember his contributions in our fight for Nelson Mandela, in Meech Lake, in free trade, in NAFTA, and he was for the little guy. I mean, he's the guy that promoted the idea of a minimum income for Canadians. He was almost alone out there promoting it. I supported him, but it was his idea. He was out there. He had it in pilot projects in various governments, but he couldn't get it done. But it'll be done someday, and it'll be due to Hugh Segal. So his personality and his approach and his love of Canada and his tolerance for people, even those who shot him down from time to time, made him a superb chief of staff and got us through some of the big things which today you look back on and you say, well, hell, why were people resisting the fight for Mandela? And why were people resisting NAFTA? And not so long ago, he said, he's talking to me, and he said, Prime Minister, when I think of the fight we had for NAFTA, and what's NAFTA today? He said it was a bruising 24-hour-a-day battle, people fighting us every inch of the way. And what is it today? Well, it's a grouping of 3 countries with 500 million people, representing 7% of the world's population, which generates 28% of the world's wealth every year. What's wrong with that?
Informative, interactive, and always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Taking it
Bring
in,
us up to date on all these things. It's so wonderful to have you on the air.
I'm thinking anyone who didn't know Hugh Segal now wishes they did.
That's a great point.
Oh, you can bet your bottom dollar on that. He was a rare bird. He had a sense of occasion, but he had a sense of the little guy. He was always on the side of the little guy. And when the finance people, Michael Wilson and his colleagues, would walk in to see me and Hugh prior to the presentation of a budget or whatever, Hugh would simply say, at a given point in time, he would listen to everything, and they'd say, Prime Minister, may I get involved? I said, sure. And then he'd go at finance, the bureaucrats and the big guys, and he was talking about how do we help ordinary Canadians? How do we help little people here? What about the guy who's got a hospital bill now because we haven't covered that part of it in healthcare? He had a sense of social justice, quite frankly, the likes of which I've rarely seen. He was a marvelous man, and I was honored to be in his company and to be his friend.
Mr. Mulroney, as I hear you describe what things were like back then, I can't help but ask what your take now is on Canadian politics. My question was going to be, do you, with your perspective, find it perhaps more divisive than it's ever been before or not?
Well, Aaron, we had a pretty rough time, I did anyway, with the rat pack that the Liberals put forward. The savage me every day of the weekend. This was not a pleasant. This was not a pleasant walk in the park every day. But what seems to have changed, and look, I'm not with it anymore. I don't understand a lot of this now. But the role of social media, which did not exist in our time, has now come to be a very strongly disruptive and sometimes extremely negative factor in our lives. And so it's very difficult for politicians these days who think that their opponents or their adversaries are across the House of Parliament to realize that it's up there in the stratosphere with social media. And I mean, not often, believe me, but from time to time I have seen some of the comments. I can't believe how horrendous and horrible the commentary is in Canada. A country like Canada, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that maybe our colleagues today in the House of Commons and elsewhere have to deal with a larger burden than I had those years ago because of this new phenomenon called social media.
Okay.
I think you're so right, and I think it's hard to face who we've become. I'd love your perspective quickly on Pierre Poilievre having changed his image, yes, physically, but also, his tone, his message. Do you think that's effective?
Well, look, I don't know Pierre well. I've met him. I've watched him in the House of Commons. He's a highly effective debater.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good in the House of Commons, and he seems to have rallied the party around some fundamental tenets. He's clearly a talented young man with a lovely wife who's an immigrant who's very, very talented. So he's got a lot to offer Canadians. I feel that. So yes, I think that he's going the right way, obviously. But Canadians have to be offered a grand vision for the country. Canadians really think about the next election is always about the future, namely their future and the future of their children and grandchildren. So they want to be offered what I refer to from time to time as a grand vision for their country, for Canada, that they love so much. And that's when you have to set aside partisanship and you have to try and summon your party and yourself to a higher objective and be able to articulate what you think is a proper vision for the future of Canada. I maybe shouldn't say this, but, the Old Testament is a line that I love, where it says that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, I've come to the view that Canadians want a combination of both. Mm. They want the visions and they want the great dreams. And if you can come close to articulating that on a major issue or a series of issues or an approach, then you may be home free. And if you haven't got that, you can find yourself pretty bereft when the crunch comes in an election campaign and you've got 51 days, or at least that was what it was in my time. You have 51 days to lead your party to victory, because for a leader of an opposition party, the options are simple. It's victory or oblivion. And so you better be ready with something that Canadians want. So I think that Poilievre is able to do that. But he better, because he's up against Justin Trudeau, who is, for whatever failings he may have, and I think he's been a fine young man. I've known him since he was 2 years old, for God's sake. But Justin Trudeau is one of the finest campaigners that this country has ever seen. So you better be careful before you put him down, because he's a tough one to fight.
Mr. Mulroney, it has been an absolute joy to have you on today. We very, very much appreciate it and wish you nothing but the best. I'm glad to hear we both are, that you're feeling better, that you're up a little bit, and now actually getting back to where you want to be. I thank you so much for your time today. All the best to you.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Always a pleasure to be on with you and at CJD. It's been a long time. My association with the station I used to be a director of standard broadcasting like 40 years ago, I guess, a long time ago. But I always loved the commentary and the people who were there, and your comments on behalf of Montreal. And so you call me anytime if you'd like to get my opinion. I'd be happy to do it.
And we will, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you so much. All the best to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well.
Bye-bye.
Informative.
Interactive.
And always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
You know how ChatGPT can write an essay for you, a speech, pretty much anything? Well, how about doling out advice when it comes to our health? Yeah, according to new research, you might not want to count on artificial intelligence to get it right. But can it be a useful tool for health professionals and patients? The doctor we spoke to had some great insight and some warnings.
We've talked an awful lot about AI over the weeks, maybe over the months on this show, and we've warned people, I think, as we started to find out more and more about it, about, taking advice from AI and considering it to be 100% solid, which is something you shouldn't have done even to begin with. Remember, they tell you now, even when you look up something on Google, when it comes to do with health, think twice before you take advice from Google. Well, we can now extrapolate that to think perhaps more than twice if you're going to take health advice from AI, from ChatGPT in this case.
Makes sense.
More details. Dr. OSMANLIU is an emergency physician at the Montreal Children's. He's also a scientist at the Research Institute at McGill. So, Dr. OSMANLIU, this is not just a warning. You've actually done studies here. You've put it through its paces. What did you discover?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So actually, it's a study we did with colleagues at Saint-Justin. The idea came from a colleague in the emergency room on the other side of the mountain at Saint-Justin, Dr. Jocelyn Gravel. He noted that while searching for references on ChatGPT, they seemed to look great, but they were actually off. So we decided to do a systematic study about it and see to what extent is that the case. And we were alarmed to find that over 70% of the time, the references that ChatGPT was providing us to back its claims were actually fabricated.
Okay, that sounds bad enough to begin with. Do you have specific examples? Like, what did you try to do?
Absolutely. So what we did is we took 20 medical questions based on recent publications in big journals in medicine, and we extrapolated questions based on those articles. And then for each question, we'd ask ChatGPT to answer it. We asked the authors of those specific studies, who are considered experts, of the specific questions, to grade the answers. Most of the time, the answers were not too bad, but there were some factual errors which are worth noting. For example, at some point, ChatGPT was suggesting giving a medication by injection, whereas it should actually be taken by mouth. In another case, it provided tenfold error on the prevalence of a given disease, of a bacterial disease at the worldwide scale. So it can give some pretty significant errors, but most of the time the suggestions it was giving were not too far off. Now, what was concerning particularly was the references it was using, right? We asked it, okay, now you're giving me that answer. Where's the data coming from? And it would actually give very convincing citations, which is fundamental in medical scientific writing, right? It's based on central trust to be able to cite properly whoever produced, the given evidence that you're using to back your claims. Mm-hmm. And what we found that although the references looked very convincing, it was an author that had published on the field, it was a medical journal that existed, the title seemed to make sense, was spot on, the question that we're asking it about. Well, actually, ChatGPT was just putting all these pieces together and inventing the references.
Wow.
Oh,
and that was the case in 70% of the case. So that was quite alarming, and a reminder that we must double check not only references, but general information that we obtain through tools like ChatGPT, which are, large language models.
Okay, so I'm thinking right away about how, as patients, we've all been told, like, don't rely on Dr. Google. Don't start looking up your symptoms and trying to diagnose yourself. Are you seeing, so this is, you're talking about from a medical level, like researchers and doctors looking at ChatGPT, but are you concerned about people actually trying to use it to self-diagnose?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen the level of misinformation, disinformation that's out there. So this is one way to perhaps combat it if people use it responsibly, if they double check their sources, if they double check it with someone, an expert they trust, or a family member, a friend that actually has some knowledge in a specific field. So it could actually help empower people in one way. But if it's used carelessly, if we don't think about those limitations, it could go the other way and really actually make that misinformation spread even more quickly.
Which, of course, is something, it's wonderful to say in theory, take the information and go ahead and do a bit of a deeper dive. But we know most people don't, right? Most people look at that and
we're in a rush,
there's the
right?
answer.
We're in a rush. Yeah.
Have you encountered that? I mean, you work in an emergency room. Have you had people come and say, hey, I looked it up, here's what I found?
Well, not yet with ChatGPT. I haven't seen it personally, but just last evening I was in the emergency room on shift, and I had a family who had looked up their child's symptoms on Google. And, it's not like I don't always discourage that, but I just remind people that some of the information can cause a lot of anxiety, can be way off and trigger unnecessary emergency room visit. In some cases, though, it can give some good advice on self-management, when to present or not. So the point is where we find trustworthy information. I think there's difficulty out there to really know, can I rely on that resource or not?
Right, and it's just making me think about how AI is confusing us on so many levels, right, in terms of what we can trust and what we can't trust. And with the doctors, AI can't ever really replace a doctor, can it? Although I'm thinking people might try to save a trip to the doctor's office and have AI fill in.
I think that's a really important question. It has great opportunity, right? An example I've been giving lately is, think about a patient who's hospitalized for 2 weeks in the hospital. Imagine how many imaging tests they've gotten, how many labs, how many teams rotated through their care, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's time for them to go home or to go to a rehab center. You want to continue, you want to have a good seamless transition of care, right? So having a clear discharge summary, for example, that has all the right information, that's nicely summarized, and it's also digestible by the patient themselves is super important. But imagine how many hours it would take a human to be able to do that information. Instead, a tool like ChatGPT is really able and apt at collecting all that information, summarizing it, and then digesting it for different people, a primary care provider, perhaps a patient themselves, a family member, really to ensure that there's a smoother transition in care. So in terms of medical summarization, for example, that's a great example. In terms of uptake of information, imagine going, again, to the emergency room. You go through triage. That's step number one. Perhaps it could be a way through a chatbot, for example, to have a pre-triage even from home and try and understand, do you really need to go in? Can we offer you some other care that's maybe more suitable to your needs? So in terms of that uptake of information, summarization of information, but to go back to your question, I think having a human in the loop, I think, is a key concept in health AI, making sure that it's safe and safely implemented also.
To your point, I find that fascinating what you just said. Imagine, because the government has made a point of going over this and trying to get us not to go to emergency rooms when we could go, of course, to see a nurse or go somewhere else. If ChatGPT could ever get to that point and tell you, based on what you're telling me, here's what you should be doing, you don't need to go to see an emergency physician. Do you think we ever get to that point? I mean, will there be enough information inputted into the system to get it to that point where you can trust it?
These are incredibly powerful systems, but would you ever trust anyone to, at the same time, give you expert medical advice, give you a cooking recipe, book your next travel to who knows where, all at once, and do it perfectly? So right now, those models are quite general, right? What's happening currently is that they're being fine-tuned to specific domains, including healthcare. And within healthcare, think about all the specialties, think about all the diseases, conditions that affect people's health. And so as we slowly fine-tune GPT to all these use cases, I think its performance will be better. But I think there's a lot of fine-tuning that needs to come with experts, but also a big part of my research and some of my colleagues at the in UHC, at UDM, and elsewhere in Quebec as well, is to involve the public, right? To understand what are their needs, like what's acceptable for them in a chatbot or in a tool like ChatGPT. So patient engagement, family and public engagement, I think is going to be key to determine what are the parameters to integrate this responsibly in our healthcare. Because I think there's a lot of opportunities, but we need to think very carefully early on. How do we integrate those? And a couple of the examples I gave are, I think, some reasonable ones in terms of making the operation smoother. And some thinkers in the health AI field, sometimes say that AI, ironically, could actually help us make AI health more human, right? Or human again. Kind of get the computer out of the way, maybe even eventually hear us talk, summarize what we're talking about, and then let the provider spend that quality time with their patients instead of having a screen in between the patient and the provider. I think that can be a really nice use of integrating it. But to your previous point, always having a human in the loop to make sure that we fact check, right? That's really key. But hopefully making some of those automatable, very time intensive, but excellent for computer tasks, right? Tasks that require summarization, attention to detail, that humans are not the best at, but we're really good at that human interaction that patients seek, right? So in terms of counseling, in terms of the connection. So hopefully we're able to gear AI and really align it with those objectives. I think then we'd really be ahead of the game.
Dr. OSMANLIU, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Really interesting stuff. Thanks again.
Fascinating, yeah.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Informative.
Interactive.
And always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump was indicted along with 18 others earlier in the week in the state of Georgia. A lot of people say this may be the most serious indictment of all. It's not federal, it's state. What does that mean? We'll talk to a reporter from the Washington Post to break it all down. Going to start off by letting you hear, first of all, so this is Fulton County, Georgia's District Attorney Fani Willis announcing the indictment against Donald Trump.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result. Subsequent to the indictment, as is the normal process in Georgia law, the grand jury issued arrest warrants for those who are charged. I am giving the defendants the opportunity to voluntarily surrender no later than noon on Friday, the 25th day of August, 2023.
And then she explained it this way because, of course, people are saying, wait a sec, this is unfair. Why are you doing this? You're partisan. She said this.
I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. The law is completely nonpartisan. That's how decisions are made in every case. To date, this office has indicted, since I've been sitting as a district attorney, over 12,000 cases. This is the 11th RICO indictment. We followed the same process. We look at the facts, we look at the law, and we bring charges.
That's it. The facts, the law, the charges. So what's next? Amber Phillips is a politics reporter with the Washington Post. She is on the line right now. Interesting piece in the Post on this today. Amber, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I guess the question next is just that. What is next? What happens from here on in?
Yeah, well, Fani Willis, who we've been hearing, says Trump and these 18 co-defendants have until August 25th to voluntarily surrender. And then we'll repeat what by now in America is a familiar process, which is the former president showing up in court with his lawyers and entering his plea, guilty or not guilty. That's called an arraignment, as well as these 18 other co-defendants. We're not sure exactly when or at what various times, but the thing that will be different and fascinating about this likely arraignment coming up in the next week or two is that cameras are allowed in the courtroom. So we'll see it all play out on national television.
And my understanding is that we will perhaps see a mugshot for the first time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The federal courthouses, one, they didn't allow cameras, and then two, it just wasn't a requirement to have a mugshot. Same with the state of New York, which indicted him back in April. But Georgia's laws are different, and this is a state investigation, state crime, and so my colleague spoke to the local sheriff down there in Atlanta who said, yeah, unless I hear differently, we're going to treat him like any other person being indicted, which means a mugshot released to the public, fingerprints, And then this is really interesting, being put in, showing up for all that at a jail, which is under such squalid conditions that it's actually been the subject of a Justice Department investigation here.
Oh, my. I wonder, as you describe this, can his defense team ask that the cameras not be allowed to be turned on?
That's a good question. I haven't asked legal experts about that. I know that judges, even in federal cases, and according to Georgia state law, they have discretion about what to do. And so we in the media actually petitioned the federal judge in the January 6th case to please allow cameras. She said no. But it's possible under Georgia law that the judge could say, I think this is too much of a spectacle. We're going to turn off the cameras.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering when you said that he's going to be treated like any other, I don't know if you said criminal, but that's the word I'm going to use anyway. He isn't just any other criminal, right? He is a former president of the United States. So I think it would be fairly understandable, would it not, if they don't want to release the mugshot and they don't want to allow cameras?
Yep, I think that's understandable, and it's why this is the fourth indictment, and the past three have not released mugshots. But I think this is just one example of how this Georgia case is different in so many ways. For example, if Trump were to become president, he could pardon himself from these federal convictions, but not in Georgia.
Oh, interesting. Okay, and none of this prevents him from running again. This is something that I find utterly fascinating. Even if he is convicted, he can still run?
Right, that's exactly right. The U.S. Constitution is pretty vague about who can run for president. Legal experts I've talked to say purposefully so. You just have to be of a certain age, a U.S. citizen, and that's pretty much it.
You know, I when you say this is a bit of a different case here because this is on a state level, not on a federal level, and I keep reading comments from people saying this one is different, and then alluding to the fact that this may be the most serious of all. Why would that be?
Yeah, I'm reporting that out right now to try to talk to legal experts. In fact, tomorrow I have a newsletter called The 5-Minute Fix, and I'm going to try to rank which of his indictments are the most serious. This one is definitely up there, and that's in part because of what we just talked about. He can't pardon himself if he were president and if he got convicted like he could in the federal cases. But then the prosecutor, Fani Willis, has put together a really sprawling indictment. She tries to tell the story of how Trump tried to overturn his election loss in a way we haven't seen yet. And she's going to try to prosecute every single detail according to this indictment. And so I think that makes this very serious. She's also got a solid track record in prosecuting people under the charge that she's got Trump with, racketeering.
Huh.
She's put the former Atlanta school superintendent and other school teachers behind bars for this.
Amber, do you have a sense of, that's incredibly impressive, and yeah, she sounds like someone you just don't want to mess with. How is the public reacting to this? Like, you know, I think politicians all have skin in the game, right? Well, and so do the public, I suppose. What seems to be the general reaction from the public?
Yeah, I would say, and I'm feeling it too, y'all, indictment fatigue. I'm serious. This is the fourth indictment in 5 months, and they've come back to back to back, and I've asked legal experts why, and it just takes a while to put these together, and they all kind of landed at the same time. So there's indictment fatigue, there's natural tribalism, everyone retreating to their partisan line, but we do see some Republican leaders trying to sway the public that will listen to them. I'm thinking that Trump is just not the candidate they should be having anymore. I'm thinking of the former lieutenant governor in Georgia, a staunch Republican conservative who testified to the grand jury and then came out yesterday and said, we can't have Trump, you guys, as our leader. We're going to keep losing elections. And so I'm going to be watching for that slice of the American public to see whether their opinions change on Donald Trump with so many back-to-back indictments.
Can I just ask you, if you wouldn't mind, for our audience here, and obviously north of the border, I mean, I know we're following this, perhaps not as deeply as people will be down there, and certainly not in the state of Georgia, but with respect to what he is being, and those 18 other people, by the way, right, there are 19 people charged under this indictment. What are the main charges here? And I know it goes on, but what are the main ones here?
Yeah, that's a great question. The main ones are that Trump and his allies did everything in their power, pushed every lever they could to try to overturn his election results. And that falls into several different categories. One is Trump and his allies pressuring state officials, calling them up, cajoling them, threatening them to change the results. Another are Trump and his allies setting up fake electors to pretend to be the real electors and signing certificates and saying, nope, Trump won the state of Georgia, and trying to hand that to Congress. And then the other are just the myriad of false statements they made to Georgia lawmakers in official hearings, and then Trump on his Twitter feed about the election. And Fani Willis is going to try to argue Trump lied and then about the election results, and then pressured all these state officials and pressed every lever he could to try to flip the results for him.
Okay.
Never a dull moment.
No, there is. And by the way, did I see this today? Trump has taken to his own social media feed to say what? He's going to release a report tomorrow of some kind. Did you see this?
Yes, I did. He also said he's going to hold a press conference on Monday at his golf course in New Jersey. And so he's amped up in a way that, honestly, I didn't see after the January 6th indictment just a couple weeks ago, where there was this sense, I was here in the city as he was getting indicted, it just felt, as he was getting arraigned, it felt like heavy, like this one landed differently, like his head was down in the courtroom, according to reporters there. And that's not the case this time. We see him treating this more as a campaign event almost.
Wow.
All right. Your 5-minute fix comes out. It's every day?
Yep, it's every day in the weekday afternoons. It's totally free, and my idea is to do exactly what we're doing here, which is answer people's basic questions about U.S. politics, which is crazy right now.
I love that. I'm going to
Washington
check that out.
Post, check it out. So this is, in fact, Amber. Amber, thank you so much. We appreciate your time this afternoon. Amber Phillips, 5-minute fix on the Washington Post. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, y'all.
You bet. Thanks, y'all.
I love the y'all, too.
Even there.
Informative,
interactive,
and always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Imagine going on a vacation without having to do any of the planning yourself. You just go to the airport, you get on a plane knowing everything has been taken care of, from the flight to dinner reservations. And it's affordable. Sound too good to be true? It actually isn't. It's called the Vacation Hunt. We talked to the co-founder.
I like this story a lot because I'm one of those people, maybe you are too, who when you travel, you do a lot of the booking on your own, right? Online.
Who doesn't nowadays?
Which is great. But you know what? What you begin to notice after doing it for a while is it is time consuming, right? And it becomes more and more time consuming as you start checking different sites and looking for a bargain here and a bargain there.
Right. And by the time you've found a flight, you're so frustrated and fed up, and then you have to start planning the rest of your trip.
How did you know that? So that said, I thought this story was kind of cool. Not so much for the how do you get there part, but for the what do you do when you get there part. ROSHNI AGARWAL is co-founder of the Vacation Hunt. She's on the line. And Roshni, if I understand this, I want to make sure I get this right. I decide I want to go, I'm going to pick a place, Paris. So I go ahead, I book my tickets, and then I go to you, and what do you do from that point on?
So there's actually, it's a little bit different than what you described.
Okay.
So what our typical model is, you pick just a vacation package, somewhere in the U.S., somewhere international, Europe-specific, or an all-inclusive resort. You go to our website, you book a package. We have different prices with different lengths, and you don't actually know you're going to go to Paris or wherever you think you're going to go. So that's actually the main thing what we do. If you do want to book tickets to Paris, we can plan you a wonderful trip where you don't have to do anything else. But our first and foremost, we really like doing our complete surprise trip.
Okay, so I was not completely wrong, but mostly wrong. The idea then, if I go to your first of all, what's the website?
Thevacationhunt.com.
Thevacationhunt.com. I go there and what am I picking? Any package at all?
So you're picking, yeah.
Okay.
We only have a few options, so we try not to make it overwhelming because I do think that in today's world of TikTok and Instagram and, you're constantly being bombarded with vacation photos, I think it's really hard to decide where you want to go, especially if you have been to a few places already. Where do you go next? And I think that's the basic premise of a surprise vacation. So let's say you want to go in November. What's a place to go in November? You don't want to freeze. You don't want to be in a hurricane. So we think of all those things for you. And so you just decide we have a lot of U.S. customers. I know you guys are in Montreal, but we also have Canadian customers too. So you decide if you want to go to the U.S. international meeting outside of Canada and outside of the U.S.
Okay.
Europe specifically, because we have a lot of people wanting to do summer trips to Europe. It's a very big, graduation present.
Yeah, and then part of what I book will be that complete package with everything taken into account.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And we do all of the work for you. You don't even have to look at the flights if you don't want to until the day you get to the airport.
That is so fun.
is cool.
And I'm seeing on your website here that you'll do like surprise honeymoons and things like that too. So who is your clientele mainly? I'm kind of intrigued about who this service appeals to most.
I think most people that book our service are usually somewhere, adults. You have to be over 18. We don't get too many people with kids, and I think we have kids ourselves. We love traveling with them, but I think it probably would freak me out to take my 1-year-old somewhere where I didn't know where I was going in the car seat situation and all that
I'm with
stuff.
you, yeah.
So we don't get a lot of people with kids. That being said, we actually, this summer, we've gotten quite a few people with older kids, like, over, 8, 9, when you don't have to worry about the car seat stuff as much or the strollers. And usually people that have more valuable things to do with their time. I'm not going to, be, completely dishonest and say you couldn't book a trip to Paris cheaper yourself, where a company, part of your fee that you pay us goes towards, our time and effort that we spend booking your trip. But, then it's not a surprise, right? If you want to go to Paris, you should go to Paris. That's great. But if you're open to going wherever and you're not sure where you want to go and you don't have the time to figure it out, or if you're flying with someone else from across the country or even across the U.S. in our case, we coordinate that for you too.
Could I go to someplace easy like New York City? Would that work as well?
Yeah. We send quite a few people to New York City. It's a really big city with lots of things to do. And honestly, it's great any time of year.
I'm wondering where this whole idea came from in the first place. I'm wondering if this is something that appealed to you and your family, and you were like, you know what, I wish this existed. And you tell me, Roshni, where did this come from, this idea?
This is going to make me look like a flake, but this is not actually what happened. My husband and I, we have regular 9-to-5 jobs. And we travel a lot. We love traveling. It's something we've been doing. We usually go on a one big trip every month or so. This is before we had kids. So anyway, but one time I wanted to plan a trip for his 30th birthday. Now I'm dating myself because this was a while ago. And I decided that we were going to go to Chile. We were going to go to Patagonia, the Atacama Desert, and he loves hiking, and it was going to be great. I bought the tickets on my lunch break at work, and then I forgot. I completely forgot that I bought tickets, and it was one of those things that I was like, okay, great. I forgot. And then I managed to tell him with 2 weeks to go and be like, oh, by the way, did you block off this, 10-day thing? We're going to go somewhere. And then he was just like, oh, what? We're going somewhere? Where are we going? And I was like, it's a surprise, which is what you say to cover your butt,
of
basically,
course.
when you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, it's a surprise. And so I planned the trip, and luckily it was a little bit, of an off season, and I had some friends that were from Chile, and I told and it was an amazing trip. It was an amazing trip. We had a great time. And he thought the surprise was part of the present, which was great for me. And I told my friends about this, and they're like, you know what? You guys go somewhere all the time. My mom and I want to go somewhere, but we don't want to deal with hurricanes, but we also want to go to a resort. Here's some, where should we go? And we had more and more and more people, start asking us about this. And one of them was like, oh, I'll even pay you. Just figure it out. My mom lives in Minnesota. I live in, Florida. We want to go somewhere together, but we don't want to, I don't want one of us to show up in the daytime. I don't want the other person to come at night by herself. So can you figure that out into the logistics? And so it kind of grew from there. And so that's how it started. And we've been doing this for almost 7 years now.
Wow.
So it's been really great. We've sent some people to some really cool places. Honestly, trips that I wish I could take myself. But yeah, it's really nice making someone happy. And I think that's really what we try to do. It can be very overwhelming to plan something.
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think the more time you spend online, the more you begin to realize that. Do you pay a significant premium for this? Because I know people ultimately, cost is still a concern.
No, actually. Basically, you use our experience of planning other people's trips and our own trips, and it's probably, honestly, the time you would spend doing it, if you average that out into like actual money, it's not very expensive.
Okay. I love the idea. And I love the surprise element of it as well, right?
It's very appealing. It's still a little scary, but it shouldn't be.
Like where
the
are you
fact
sending
that,
me?
Yeah, it's because you're taking care of everything. And when you say everything, we're talking like you get on the flight, and from that point on, you don't worry like to get to your hotel. Do you need to get a cab, or what about the little details?
We tell you everything.
Wow.
So we tell you if an Uber is your best bet or exactly what train line to take. We make dinner reservations the first couple of days. Basically, we know that you don't know where you're going. So anything that you would really need to know, or I think a lot of people have a little bit of what if it's really cold or something? We'll tell you beforehand, hey, you maybe want to bring a jacket. So things like that. And the one other thing I wanted to mention that's really cool, and I think that this is pretty unique to us, is that we give you clues to where you're going on social media. So we'll ask for your Instagram handle and then post clues, about your trip or about your destination. And so anyone can guess where you're going, your friends, family,
it's so neat.
So
yourself.
fun.
I love this.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we're out of time. It's called, the website is thevacationhunt.com. Pretty easy. You're on the site, not too hard to navigate through, right?
Super easy to navigate.
Okay. And sounds like a whole lot of fun, especially if you have something, thinking of a trip and want to just let someone else worry about all the details. Love the idea, and love that it's just a small business. I mean, you put this together, as you described,
with your husband,
which I think is great, and you guys are doing well. So thanks so much. We appreciate the time today. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Continued success.
Thevacationhunt.com.
I'm
cool
into
idea.
this. Yeah.
And that wraps up another edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and we will see you next week.
Have a fantastic week.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6
on CJAD 800
or through the iHeartRadio app.